Overseas, Russia hit Ukraine with yet another massive drone attack. Another example of the critical role drones are playing in modern conflicts.
She has been blamed by Russia on a Ukrainian drone attack. It was one of a series of strikes on Russian military infrastructure this weekend.
The war in Ukraine has been full of stunning twists. But what unfolded on this night was unlike anything seen before. Under the cover of darkness, with the air tense and silent, Ukraine launched a coordinated assault that shocked not only Russia, but the entire watching world. 300 drones, swarming in perfect formation, descended on one of Russia's most heavily guarded sites, its biggest military hospital, a place that symbolized Moscow's ability to treat its wounded soldiers and sustain its war machine was suddenly under siege from the skies.
Ukraine says it's ramping up the homegrown production of drones as it struggles to cope with the demand for the technology on the front line.
The attack was not only audacious but devastating, and what happened afterward carried consequences that no one had fully anticipated. For months, Ukraine had been testing the limits of drone warfare. Cheap, fast, and difficult to intercept, drones had become the equalizer in a war where Russia maintained overwhelming superiority in traditional firepower. But never before had Kyiv attempted an operation of this scale. 300 drones launched simultaneously from different points created a storm of buzzing engines and flashing lights that overwhelmed Russia's air defenses. Witnesses reported the skies over the region lighting up as anti-aircraft fire traced arcs into the night. But the sheer volume of drones meant many slipped through untouched. Some crashed into defensive installations, some into barracks, and dozens into the sprawling hospital complex that stood at the center of Russia's medical support system. The explosions were relentless. One wing of the hospital collapsed under the force of the strikes, flames engulfing operating theaters and wards that had been filled with injured soldiers recovering from the front. Russia had invested millions into this facility, not only as a hospital but also as a symbol of resilience. Propaganda often showed rows of wounded men being treated there, promising their return to the battlefield. That illusion crumbled in seconds. Videos soon emerged showing plumes of black smoke rising into the night sky.
What we're seeing here is an extraordinary assault that not only is it a demonstration of Ukraine's ability to innovate.
Emergency vehicles struggling to respond as secondary explosions rocked the area. Russian state media tried to contain the story, but the truth spread quickly. Footage leaked online painted a grim picture. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of casualties, both patients and medical staff caught in the inferno. For Moscow, this was more than a tactical blow. It was a humiliation. How could the world's second largest military fail to protect its most important hospital? And how could a nation fighting for its survival pull off such a daring strike? The immediate aftermath was chaos. Russian authorities scrambled to relocate surviving patients, with makeshift field hospitals erected in gymnasiums and warehouses. Doctors and nurses, many themselves injured, worked around the clock amid shortages of supplies. Families of soldiers panicked, flooding hotlines and social media with desperate questions. The Kremlin, facing international embarrassment, tried to frame the attack as a terrorist act rather than a military operation. But the damage was done, not only to bricks and mortar, but to morale.
Overseas, Russia hit Ukraine with yet another massive drone attack. Another example of the critical role drones are playing in modern conflicts.
For Ukraine, the operation was hailed as one of its greatest successes. Officials in Kyiv described it as a demonstration of what asymmetric warfare could achieve. Drones cost us a fraction of a missile, but tonight they destroyed what billions of rubles had built, one advisor said.
Its victory in Ukraine is inevitable. This extraordinary operation shows that Ukraine is still in this fight.
Western allies, though cautious, could not hide their astonishment. The attack proved that Russia's defenses were not impenetrable, even against a target deep inside its territory. More importantly, it signaled a shift. Ukraine was no longer just reacting to Russian offensives. It was dictating the terms of battle. But then came the twist. Within hours of the hospital's destruction, Russia launched a furious counterstrike. Waves of missiles and cruise projectiles were fired into Ukrainian cities, hitting energy grids, apartment blocks, and transport hubs. Moscow framed it as retaliation, vowing that every drone will be answered with a missile. Civilians once again bore the brunt of Russia's rage, with blackouts spreading across Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Odessa. Ukraine had landed a historic blow, but it came at a cost, an escalation that deepened the suffering of ordinary people. At the same time, Russia's military command was thrown into turmoil. Intelligence leaks suggested senior officers had been in the hospital at the time of the attack, holding strategy meetings. Some reports claim that high-ranking figures were killed or wounded, though Moscow denied it. If true, the loss went far beyond medical infrastructure. It meant Ukraine had decapitated a piece of Russia's command structure in one strike.
Of projectiles fired from the other's territory into the other's territory. And you rightly said that in the most recent one, it was 126 Ukrainian drones.
Analysts quickly speculated that Ukraine had timed the assault deliberately, using intelligence to ensure maximum impact. International reaction was split. Some Western governments praised Ukraine's ingenuity and resilience, calling the strike a legitimate act of war against a military target.
He has been blamed by Russia on a Ukrainian drone attack. It was one of a series of strikes on Russian military infrastructure this weekend.
Strike Russia where it's not expecting it. It's also a clear indication that Russia is not invincible.
Others worried about the optics of attacking a hospital, even if it was primarily a military facility. Moscow seized on that debate, accusing Ukraine of war crimes and demanding condemnation. But for many observers, the bigger picture was clear. This was the new face of war, not tanks grinding across fields, not artillery barrages, but swarms of cheap drones, overwhelming billion-dollar defenses, and redefining modern conflict. Inside Russia, the blow resonated deeply. Soldiers at the front, already stretched thin, heard that the one place they might find recovery and safety had been reduced to rubble. Recruitment suffered, with fewer men willing to enlist, knowing that medical care could not be guaranteed. Families of the wounded were furious, demanding answers from the government about how such a catastrophe had been allowed to happen.
A way that the Russian security services and military have been stunned by and were absolutely not ready for.
The Kremlin, usually adept at controlling narratives, struggled to spin the story. Propaganda outlets insisted the hospital would be rebuilt stronger than before, but few believed it. In Ukraine, the mood was triumphant but tense. People celebrated the strike as proof that David could still strike Goliath. Yet everyone knew retaliation was inevitable, and indeed Russia's missiles fell hard in the days that followed. Still, the sense of empowerment was palpable.
But as a leader of the country, would you condone drones going over the border?
For a nation battered by invasion, to see its drones dismantle one of Russia's most vital facilities was a reminder that ingenuity and determination could achieve the impossible. The attack also sent shock waves through militaries worldwide. Generals and defense analysts scrambled to study what had happened, realizing that the future of warfare had arrived. 300 drones costing a fraction of traditional weapons had achieved what no massive air raid could.
Drones have been crucial for Ukraine in the war and can now be operated from just about anywhere.
Countries from NATO to Asia began reviewing their defenses, fearing that they too might be vulnerable to such swarms. Yet perhaps the most striking aftermath was psychological. The destruction of Russia's biggest military hospital became more than a tactical strike. It became a symbol of Russia's vulnerability, of Ukraine's resilience, and of how modern war punishes those who underestimate innovation.
Ukraine has long used long-range drones launched from Ukraine, which then fly into Russian airspace.
For every soldier in the trenches, the message was clear. Nothing is untouchable anymore. As the smoke cleared, as families mourned, and as leaders on both sides calculated their next moves, the world was left to reckon with the reality that the war had entered a new phase. Ukraine's 300 drones had done more than destroy a hospital. They had destroyed illusions. They had exposed weakness. And they had ensured that nothing in this conflict would ever be the same again.
Is pretty vulnerable against unmanned threats, drone threats.
More sort of rarely, the Russian drone attack was actually lesser numerically overnight than the Ukrainian drone attack.
Because after this night, one question echoed across battlefields and capitals alike. If Russia's most protected medical stronghold could fall to drones, what couldn't? The answer, terrifyingly for Moscow, seemed to be nothing at all.